Hello and thank you for joining us. My name is Pete Horsley. I am the founder of Remarkable. We're a division of Cerebral Palsy Alliance, and we have support from iCare Foundation, from Telstra and Microsoft. Remarkable's mission is to harness technology and innovation to see barriers to full inclusion of people with disability broken down. We do that predominantly through our 14-week accelerator program that takes early stage companies, and we invest in them, and we give them the tools and skills and network in order to grow their business and grow the impact that they have. I want to begin as well by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land. I'm calling from Gayamaga land, and I want to acknowledge the traditional owners past, present and emerging. I also want to acknowledge that each of you are dialing in from a number of different places, both in Australia and even across the world, and acknowledge the traditional owners in those places as well. We also want to acknowledge those advocates who have played a role in advancing the rights of people with disability, leading to address the inequalities faced by people with disability across time. They've really paved the way for us. And really, it brings home to me that we can only do this better together with them. Today's conversation is about doors open for specialist disability accommodation. It's part of a Remarkable Insight series, and this Insight series is really about saying, how do we create an inclusive now? What are those barriers that exist, and how can we break those down? But let's not just think about that future state. Let's think about what we can do now to change some of that. For anyone who wants to follow this conversation on social media, please use our social handles at Remarkable Tech. So we're on Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. And also please use the hashtag Remarkable Insights. We're also on Instagram on Remarkable_Tech. We'll also be recording this event, so if you do have someone that you'd like to share this with, please make sure you register for our YouTube updates. You can also see that with Remarkable Tech. We also have live captioning today, so it's using an AI, so apologies in advance for any errors on that, but you can use that by clicking the CC closed caption icon on the bottom of your screen. And we're also joined today by Therese Lewis. Thank you for providing our Auslan interpretation as well. So we're joined today by an incredible panel. We have Rebecca Thomas, Executive Director of Impact Investing at Social Ventures Australia. Welcome, Rebecca. We have Perry Cross, AM, CEO and founder of Accessible Homes Australia. And we have Alicia Rathbone, General Manager, Housing Hub at the Summer Foundation. Welcome to our panel. Welcome. It's good to see you all. Now, I want to also just maybe just start by also asking, where are you all dialing in from? So there's a little checkbox that you can click down the bottom called chat. If you are able to click on that and please just type in where you're calling from, that would be super interesting to find out where you're calling from. So we've got Sydney, Wodonga, Sunshine Coast, amazing, Victoria, up in Fraser, Melbourne, Phrygian Beach, beautiful, Mermaid Beach, Ballarat, fantastic. Thank you for joining us. Perth, amazing. Good morning in Perth, Melbourne, fantastic. Really, really great to have you all with us today. And just a couple of terminologies. We'll probably be using terminology like SDA, and that's commonly used terms. SDA stands for Specialist Disability Accommodation. So if you like, think about that as the bricks and mortar that are accessible homes that people can access. And then we possibly might also use the term SIL or SIL, which is supported independent living. So really around the kind of service provision that's provided, sometimes in SDA homes. And obviously in Australia, I haven't seen any overseas callers today, but sometimes for our overseas callers. We also have a social policy in Australia called the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is run by the National Disability Insurance Agency, or NDIA. So just a couple of things there. So the National Disability Insurance Scheme has allocated $700 million per annum for Specialist Disability Accommodation, or SDA, to provide 28,000 Australians with complex support needs with access to appropriate housing. So SDA funding has the potential to stimulate around $5 billion in private sector funding or private sector investment, and transform this kind of older model of segregation to provide people with disabilities much more choice and control. Now, looking at this from the outside, Rebecca, I might start with you. This all sounds like a really incredible investment opportunity. It sounds all very straightforward. Is it as straightforward as this? And then we do have someone who's dialing in today who's asked a question around this as well, which is, how much demand for SDA is there? So can you just enlighten us on is it all as straightforward as this incredible investment opportunity? Everything's just going to go smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, I wish it was a straightforward investment opportunity. I think to frame that question, I think it's worth saying that it is a great investment opportunity if you can get everything aligned. And by that, I mean all the alignment with all the stakeholders that are in the sector. So whether that be the tenant, the investor, the SDA provider, and the SIL provider. So already that's a complex group of people with very different needs and kind of how they're operating in the sector. So I think when I put my kind of investor hat on, it's definitely a great opportunity from a risk returns perspective. The SDA payments are coming from federal government payments, and so for the risk that you're taking around that as an investor, it's a really strong opportunity. But that alignment of stakeholders makes it a tricky opportunity, because it's not just about building a home and you get the SDA payment and you get a return as an investor. It's about building a home to the right level in the right area that has a demand for that type of home. And I think what we're finding, and as an organisation who has kind of gone on a journey for the last 12 to 24 months on investing in the space, what we're learning is how we make sure that we're building the right homes in the right places, because that's the best way for us to get the right returns for our investors. So I think in the context of your question, I think there's definitely an opportunity, but it's definitely not a straightforward one. And to your point, Pete, just the question about demand, that 28,000 number that you mentioned is kind of bandied about a lot. I think, it's hard to put an exact figure on what demand looks like. The data is getting better. And I know, from the last December numbers that the NDIS released, we've got 15,000 active SDA participants out there in Australia. So that's pointing towards kind of what the demand looks like, but that's not the full picture, because that's not everyone who has SDA in their plans. That doesn't take into account people's desire to move into an independent living situation. And so what that means in terms of actual demand, it's really hard to get a true picture on that. So it's probably anywhere between the 28,000 that you mentioned and higher, and maybe less, depending on kind of where people want to move and where they're moving from and to where. So I'm sorry, that's not a direct answer, but
no, it's good.
A reflection.
And I guess for some it would be that they don't know that there's an opportunity here exactly. for this kind of support. But for others, they're actually struggling to get that in their plans in the appropriate way as well. Have you got any kind of colour to that?
I think what we found that, the improvement in the planning process has definitely come through in the last couple of years. So, when SDA was kind of at the top of people's minds, it was taking a long time to get SDA in their plans. And I think the NDIA has invested a lot in kind of streamlining that planning process and making it much easier for individuals. I think there's still, as you mentioned, a lot of education around what is achievable and what can be achievable, and that also then, whether that be education from a carer perspective or education from individual tenants, or even the kind of the builders out there from an SDA perspective, So I think there's an improvement in kind of planning times and what planning means, but I don't know whether there's been such an improvement on that education side of things.
And Alicia, that kind of the planning that that Rebecca's just mentioned, you know, there's I guess a building evidence base of data around that, and that's kind of, I guess, one part of the solution. But what part should that kind of co-design of right buildings in the right places for the right needs, what part of that should co-design play in progressing this part of the housing market?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that data is such a key part of when you think about co-design and the voice of people with disability being at the centre of how this SDA market evolves. So I would agree that the data from the NDIA that's coming out is really improving. However, it doesn't show where people want to live. And that's just so important when you think about you going into your new home. The first question is, I want to live in this location or this location because it's close to whatever. So collecting data and understanding people's housing needs and preferences is really important step here to then inform the market about what people with disability are looking for. And so for me, that's how I think about data in the co-design picture. It's about people with disability knowing what options are out there, being able to say where you want to live, who you want to live with, what type of house do you want to live with, and then using that as a key input into then what is designed in the market. And there's some great ways that that's starting to happen now with different providers wanting to start with people with disability and that information. And then also wanting to then build in some cases for people that need a certain build based on their particular needs, but also their preferences.
And Perry, you've been on this journey, and for you've got a successful outcome around this. I guess I want our webinar attendees to hear something about your journey into this and what you thought your housing options were at the beginning, and now what the result has been. Can you kind of give us a little bit of your story around that?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Pete. G'day to all the listeners. I had a spinal injury at the age of 19, and my family had provided my accommodation supports basically all my life. And then I heard about the SDA a little while ago, and sort of got ahead of the game and got a plan written up and thought I would conquer the whole SDA thing quite simply and quite easily. And then the first plan I had was to go and get my own place and buy a place and then modify it and, Bob's your uncle, it'll be okay. And I realised that wasn't going to work. So I went back to the drawing board and I set up Accessible Homes Australia with a couple of close friends who'd been experienced in real estate, building and property development. And that gave me the skill set to be able to go out there and then do it properly. So I found an apartment in a high-rise building that I could modify to be accessible, meet the code and the standard, because there's really, really strict guidelines around what it looks like and what, circulation spaces there are, and door widths, all this sort of stuff, which is important. And then, submitted my application to the NDIA to have SDA put into my plan, and I got approved. But that took 2 years. That was a long journey, and it was a frustrating journey. There were times where I felt like it wasn't going to be worth it, and that I wasn't getting anywhere. But now that I'm settled in and I have a place, I have a roof over my head, it's changed my life. So I'm very, very grateful. And, we want to do that for more and more people, because it is a hard road and it can be tiring, but I think it's well worth it when you see people move into a place that my place is fully automated. I can, voice activate the lights, the TV, the door, the blinds, the front door, all these sort of things, which is fabulous. And it gives me independence. It means that I'm not always communicating with a personal support worker to do everything for me. I've got AI to help me.
Brilliant. And there's a great video of you kind of doing a tour of your apartment on Broadbeach, and so I encourage people to have a look at that. And you can see some of the incredible innovations that are built into your house. Are there any, Perry? Are there any innovations that you currently don't have that you wish existed?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, technology has come so far in the last few years that I'm very grateful for what we already have, because we didn't have any of these fantastic voice controlled sort of things. I guess having really good Wi-Fi is important to making all this work, because without that, then it's a bit of a failure. Look, I don't think there's anything that we haven't seen yet that's not surprising. Maybe some telehealth type models where you have a robot in the house where you can talk to someone that's linked up with some physical supports that someone can come and help. Might be a thing in the future, but I think we're headed towards that at the moment anyway.
Brilliant. And we're seeing a few kind of questions come in the chat function. It'd be really great if people could pop those into the Q&A. Just for anyone that's using screen readers, the chat function does interrupt the flow of the conversation there. So please direct all of your questions into Q&A. But I might just pick up one that has come through on the chat there. Particularly, I think James Watson is asking, interested in finding if it's possible for people with SDA funding to live with a partner or a friend without SDA funding. So in other words, like a 2-bedroom house or apartment where only 1 bedroom is being SDA funded. Perry, or actually any of the panelists, do you want to kind of take this one?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. It's just been a recent change to the rules to allow people to live with a partner or a friend. There is a little bit of paperwork involved, and you do have to notify NDIA that you have someone else living in an SDA property, but that is a good outcome and a good change to the system.
Brilliant, that's great. Yeah, just a reminder to pop those questions into Q&A if that's okay. There was one other question up there, just asking particularly about the quarterly report for NDIA was talking about some HPS housing, and the SVA report says there's about 80 homes in the pipeline. There's a shortfall of 300 homes. Is there some, where is SVA getting that data from? Do you want to take that, Rebecca?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know whether it was on the same comparable date basis, because I know the Summer Foundation have done an updated report since the SVA report, but I know that a lot of work goes into that, not just in terms of the underlying data, but conversations with SDA providers and trying to get the colour that Alicia mentioned in terms of what's actually going on that isn't captured by NDIA data. So that may explain the discrepancies. I wouldn't be able to give you an exact answer because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they're probably different data sources.
Brilliant. So obviously SDA housing, and as Rebecca, you said before, numbers might be slightly lower than that or slightly higher than that, but around about 6% at the moment of those supported through the NDIS could potentially have access to SDA. One of the things that strikes me, and it's something that you said before, Alicia, as well, is this lack of choice about where someone with accessibility needs can choose to live. And a report that surveyed some people last year with mobility impairment found that 73.6% of respondents were living in housing that didn't match their needs. This leads to an increased costs around modifications, also the need for paid and unpaid care, and a reduction potentially in workforce participation as well. And last week there was an open letter written by 30 plus organisations to Prime Minister Scott Morrison, asking him to secure new accessibility standards in our building code for the rising number of people who will require some form of accessibility. Rebecca, you wrote an article in 2019 that spoke to the larger number of people who are in dire need of a suitable place to live, but for whom additional government funding is not available through the NDIS. I know there aren't simple answers to this challenge, but what do you think are some of the likely avenues of possibility are here?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, and I wish there was a really easy solution. I think when SBA looks at housing investment more generally, there's lots of levers that you can pull effectively to make housing investment and housing more affordable. And I think we can learn from those in looking at how we make kind of disability housing more generally an investable product. I think SDA has piqued investors' interest, and that obviously helps from a kind of dollar return perspective. But how, to your point, Pete, how do we make kind of disability housing or accessible housing more generally investable? So I think anything that we can do in terms of standardizing building codes, I think is a great step in the right direction, because it then means that you're not looking at accessible houses different to a normal residential house. So anything that can kind of build economies of scale from a cost perspective, and that's also in terms of innovation, what becomes standard in housing that you're not having to pay extra for, because anything that requires additional cost from an investor perspective makes that a bit harder from a returns perspective. So I think innovation, more investment in the sector, more standardization in terms of housing, that means that it's a housing market that's accessible for all, and that we're not differentiating between what is disability housing and what is residential housing. The more that kind of that becomes a conversation, I think it's a great way to make it much more of an investable product.
Yeah. And Alicia, Summer Foundation helped to lead this 30 organisation coalition as part of the Building Better Homes Coalition. Can you give us some examples of those that don't fit into SDA and but who do have these additional housing needs?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, SDA is wonderful policy reform, but it is for only 6% of participants. So the vast majority of people who have a disability won't be eligible for SDA. So there's a lot of people with varying disabilities. So sometimes, it can still be physical disabilities where someone isn't eligible for SDA. It can also be cognitive impairments, acquired disabilities, those sorts of things. But this campaign is much broader than that as well. And it's about all Australians having homes that people can age in place. As we're getting an older population, we're seeing more and more people moving into residential aged care. So having homes without as many steps, with wider doorways when people need mobility aids over their lifetime is really important. And another really important thing to consider is people who do have a disability still want to visit family and friends, of course, like anybody else. And so there's, I often hear that story from people. There's so many barriers. So even if you have your own home that is set up for you, you might then want to go and visit mum and dad or, grandparents, and, you can't actually get up the stairs or you can't get through the doorway, that sort of thing. So we're trying to bring awareness to this campaign that people can sign the petition and really back that and say that we change the building code in Australia so that we build in some of these accessibility features as standard across new homes that are built in Australia.
It's brilliant. And I think it was our current Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Ben Gauntlet, that said it's 22 times more expensive to retrofit a home or to kind of put accessibility features into a home than it is to build that from scratch. So Perry, you're acquired disability, and not to be kind of sensationalist about this, but a number of people said that disability is the largest kind of global minority that any one of us can enter at any point in our lives. And you also speak about the relevance of accessible accommodation to the ageing population as well, just as Alicia's just mentioned. So it is really relevant to each of us. But why do you think that this gets so little attention?
Yeah, I think generally people are very focused on the now, and we're not too worried about where we're going to be in 10 or 20 years' time, whatever your age bracket may be. And I think people who are currently moving into, nursing homes, residential aged care, all that sort of stuff are probably thinking, well, how amazing would it be if I could remain in my primary place of residence instead of having to move everyone into new housing. So it's important we consider housing for a lifetime, and that's what the Building Better Homes sort of philosophy is about. But I guess also to go with that, the reason that the NDIA have created such a great scheme, such as the SDA, part of it is about rationalising some costs for support of independent living, which is the SIL side of things. And I think that's also important for people to understand. And I can see where Stephen has made a comment saying that in the chat there that people get different outcomes at different times. And there's probably a reason behind that for people, that they'll get an SDA outcome or a SIL outcome. But I think the approach is going to change, and people get their SIL and SDA outcomes maybe together would be a really good outcome for the scheme, because then people could choose their housing and move into it more, more easily, more quickly. But the reason is that they want to see people living more closely together, so that we don't have support workers driving around the community, going from one house to the next house, looking after people. So there's a lot of efficiency that the scheme is trying to create, and invest in the right areas to make people's lives better. So it's a complex scheme for a lot of reasons, but if we had the foresight now to say, oh look, let's build better homes for everyone for the future, then we would probably alleviate a lot of the challenges we're trying to deal with. So.
We've got a question in the Q&A, so please keep those questions coming. They said, what's your opinion on the large amounts of SDA apartments being built together and large group homes? Is it not the same as what was happening in the past with kind of those larger group homes, not the goal of NDIS and all the participants? I guess that's a little bit to kind of what you were talking about there, Perry, but any of the panelists wanted to comment on that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Oh, Alicia, did you want to go? I'll go quickly first. I think that's a good observation, but I will say that the numbers in kind of investment in other areas are improving. So, for example, we know robust homes are not getting the level of investment that's needed, and I think from an SVA perspective and how we work, we're trying to be as diverse as possible in how we're investing. So looking at that both from across the housing type in terms of whether it's a villa or a townhouse, but also where are we investing geography wise. I definitely think kind of the first movers went into that apartment market, but I think there's definitely been an improvement in that. And as the NDIA changes how the payment is flowing, we know that there's levers to be pulled to move investment into different directions based on supply versus demand. So I think you'll see as the market evolves much more breadth of investment across those different types. But over to you, Alicia.
I'll just add to that, just around the concept of congregate models. I think that's a little bit where this question can go to. And we get asked this a lot. We work with people every day who are looking for SDA funding, and we support people to get funded. And the first thing I would say again is start with each individual. What's your needs and preferences? Where do you want to live? Do you want to live in an apartment that has 2 bedrooms and you can live with your spouse and kids? Or are you looking to live in a share house type arrangement, either with a person with disability or not? So I would say, all models are required at the moment. We are moving from the group home type model into this more independent living, which is excellent. And that is what people with disability are telling us that they're looking for in the market. However, some people would like to know that there's other people with disability, maybe next door in another apartment or down the hall, that sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely say that we can't sort of say one is better than the other, that it depends on what individual needs people have, and that we support those to be developed.
And I might stick with you on this one, Alicia. We've had a question from Lisa Strudrick. Hi, Lisa. That in terms of the apartment style SDA, we've heard from a SIL provider that only participants need to have a maximum of 12 hours of SIL are eligible. Can you confirm?
Yes, so there are some changes happening in the market at the moment around what's known as the concierge model of support, which is provided in the apartment type of SDA. And so this is not something that's been publicly announced by the NDIA, but I understand that the NDIA is testing out the concierge model. And so that the concierge is usually, say, there's 10 apartments scattered throughout, say, 200. Everyone lives in their own apartment and can decide what core supports they bring in and who supports them day to day. But then there'll be an 11th apartment where SIL provider is there as backup support. So yes, there are conversations happening, and I have also heard the same thing, Lisa, that people with over 12 hours of one-to-one support, some people in the agency would say that they're not eligible to live there. Our approach at Summer at the moment has been to understand the legislation and then understand people's eligibility against that, and then have a conversation with the NDIA to understand the reasons why you might be being told this for that individual, and then work through that with the evidence that you have in your reports. Certainly can talk to anyone offline about that if anyone would like to.
Thanks, Alicia. Perry, I might direct this question to you. This is from James. How possible is it for people to use SDA funding to purchase their own place rather than rent from a provider? Is this practical?
Look, it is possible for people to become what is termed a self-provider. It does come with all the regulatory sort of red tape, hard work as in setting up an SDA company and all those sort of being NDIS approved. So there is a lot of work involved in that for probably relatively small effort in terms of if you're going to do it yourself. But people are doing it. It is a long process and very regulatory. You have to be audited and all these sort of things that happen. But some people are going down that path. I think if you want to be a self-provider, it's probably something you need to consider is the supports that you want to have around you, because as a self-provider, you might end up a bit isolated in the community, not close enough to other people to get some sort of efficiency for your support. Maybe that's one thing you need to consider is when you get the SIL funding, that's going to match your SDA outcome. That's what people need to probably understand when they're going down that path.
Brilliant, thanks, Perry. There was a question from Ket just asking Alicia, is there a link to the petition around the open letter that we could provide? Maybe we can provide that in a follow-up, or if you could pop that into the chat, that would be fantastic. Another question here. Friends with Disability have said that despite requesting to live alone, they've been funded for house or group home to the point where people are saying that it's the default funding response from the NDIA. And we should all say that we don't kind of speak on behalf of NDIA, but has this been your experience with supporting people through the funding process? Alicia, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been a trend over the last few months to see this. So to the person who wrote this is not just your situation. And what I would say again to what I said before is, again, looking at the evidence that you have, what's the needs for yourself or your friend, what's the SDA rules and the legislation say, and then actually have a conversation. So it is possible to appeal a decision like that if you believe it's wrong and it's not consistent with the evidence. And there are organisations such as advocates who can support people with disability to undertake such appeals.
That's brilliant. We've got a really great question here from Jessica saying, what are some of the best practice and innovations when it comes to SIL arrangements for SDA in Australia? Are there any case studies or stories to share? Perry, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a good question. At the moment, it's so new that there's probably not a lot of case studies to be able to share. I mean, my experience, I'm on life support, ventilated, so I've always got someone around me. So I'm in a unique situation that I have to have 24/7 support. But my housing outcome is amazing. I'm fortunate enough to be able to use my voice, so assistive technology helps me immensely. Being able to, control the functions in my house that I mentioned earlier is a really important thing, because the demand on personal support workers can be high. You know, like there are times in my day where my carers, you know, I'll have two carers together for sort of an hour or two in the morning getting me ready. It's a really intense part of the day. But if I have assistive technology there to be able to help me do some of the personal things that I want to do, listen to some music or whatever it might be, then that's really beneficial while they're doing their things as well. So many hands make light work, and if some of it's assistive technology, even better. So yeah, I guess I didn't really answer the question directly, but we'll see more and more of this evolve in the next years. You know, coming.
And they can definitely have a look at your video. We've posted a link in the chat for the link to the tour of your home. So that's definitely, I think, a case study. And I love the way that you kind of put that, of really giving you kind of autonomy and control in your own home to do the things that that you'd want to do, right? Raise the blinds, turn on the TV, listen to some music. I really love that. And the technology is available right now. Now, before we kind of ask the final question, I do want to ask for one insight that you have around SDA and accessible accommodation as well, so kind of broader than just SDA. But I want to ask each of you what you're excited about in the future of this space. Rebecca, do you want to take that one first of all?
Yeah, I think general level of excitement in kind of having these conversations and seeing how far the market has progressed. That's kind of current state of excitement, as it were. I think from the work that we're doing, and what's interesting is that, you know, we've talked about what's investable, and we're doing some work around outcomes framework, so how we actually measure what is good and what that means from outcomes for tenants and their families. And so there's some work that we're doing around that. And I think that's really exciting in terms of being able to provide choice to tenants as well. So, you know, are you moving into a house that has good outcomes for you as an individual? What does that mean? Those kinds of things. So in a market that's non-regulated as such, how do we make sure that people are ensuring that outcomes are kept for the tenants, are kept kind of at the centre of their decisions? So to me, that's really exciting and something that I'm looking forward to kind of rolling out.
Brilliant, thank you. Alicia, what about you? What's one thing you're excited about in this space?
Yeah, so it's really, for me, it's around people with the lived experience. It's starting to shape and drive the market. So as I said before, with that data, you know, we're collecting that through the Housing Hub. We're supporting people through events and capacity building, but how that then transfers into the vision, which is, you know, people with disability have the money in their plan. People can go and decide how to be informed consumers and really drive the market. So we're really striving for little steps we can take with the different work that's happening to help support people to really be about people with disability shaping this market. And I can see it. We're getting there. There's little glimmers. We've still got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of information to share. We need to tell someone. If everyone can just tell someone about SDA who you think might, you know, have high support needs, that's a great way to help find out about it, then start understanding what people need, and then connecting with providers and shaping the market.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And Perry?
Yep, I totally agree with Alicia, but also our project at Palm Beach on the Gold Coast, which will be open probably August, September, is an exciting project. We'll see people move into it. That'll change their lives. It's, you know, right on the beach. It's an amazing location. But adding to that, in the years to come, the tram line on the Gold Coast is meant to go right past that front door of that apartment building. And to me, that is when we'll see the true efficiency of community supports, great SDA housing, great SIL, all combining to make people's lives so much better, so much easier. And we'll see people with disability flourish like we've never seen before, because all these sort of great innovations are coming together to allow people to live a great life. And that's what I can't wait to see.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. And we have had there's a couple of questions still in Q&A, and I do want to touch on this one. We're almost out of time, but this one just says social responsibility benefit is huge, but how do we encourage investors to invest in land and building projects? And what's the economic value proposition? Rebecca, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I'd agree when it comes to SDA, that's the benefit from a social impact investor is huge. And that's why it's such a unique proposition right now in Australia, because kind of investing at scale from a social impact perspective hasn't really been there, and SDA provides that real opportunity. I think kind of generally when it comes to residential investment, it's always a hard market to get people to come into at scale. And so I think, how do you put some context around that in terms of what this means for kind of financial return, but also investment into community? And it's always a battle that we have from an impact investing perspective, because investors don't necessarily want to take a financial hit, and that shouldn't be what we're doing. We should be looking at kind of risk adjusted and appropriate returns. So I think it's having a story to tell and understanding kind of what are the drivers of your returns. Is it long-term tenancies? What is the value that you're adding to a social benefit that you're providing to a community? What, as an investor, are you willing to do? And I think, we're seeing much more investment in affordable housing more generally, and super funds coming into that market. And I think, the last year has taught us, and a lot of investors have learned kind of that social responsibility is key for them as investors. So I think there's definitely groundswell coming through the market in terms of investing more broadly into socially responsible housing projects.
Brilliant. The questions keep flowing in, so we will have to kind of, I do want to ask each of you, just if there is one insight that you think in ways that we can create a more inclusive now, what would that remarkable insight be? And I won't pick on you, but anyone kind of want to take that question first?
I can put something else out there.
Thanks, Alicia.
Yeah, and something I think about a lot, we're very involved in the SDA market and we want to see it flourish, and there's, like I said, a long way to go, but I always am thinking about what about all the people that aren't eligible for SDA, and there's a lot of people who need accessible features who aren't. And so I would say, yeah, that, sparking a conversation in the sector with, whether that's bringing together potential investors, the providers of the housing, the support, and tenants, and that voice, and how can we come up with a model that means people with disability who aren't eligible for SDA can also have options when it comes to housing.
Brilliant. Perry.
Sorry, I'm still on mute. I guess one of the bigger picture things, and I don't know, Alicia might not like this idea, but having the real estate.com feature for accessible homes, like one day maybe getting to a point where you get a realestate.com to find your housing instead of at the moment, Alicia's got a great website, the Housing Hub. Summer Foundation do an awesome job, but once we reach full inclusivity is when we'll see those sort of normalization of things for everyone. So
I agree, Perry. Sorry, I just want to say I don't disagree, and I think we shouldn't need it, which is the point. When we don't need it, we know we've won. So
absolutely, 100%. That's brilliant. We all need to do ourselves out of a job, right? So that's good. Rebecca, what about you?
I think from an insight perspective, I'd say working in the SDA kind of market, it requires a level of persistence. I think Perry mentioned this, and I think also just the insight in that it's not an easy place to be in terms of all the different stakeholders. So to kind of be aware that there's no such thing as an easy investment or an easy kind of return in this sector. So go into it with an open mind and with an alignment of what you're trying to do in terms of Alicia's point around people with lived experience, and really have that at the center of the decisions you're making, because that will provide success in the long term for all the stakeholders. So I think that would be my insight.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. That's fantastic. There's a few questions in there that we're unfortunately out of time. If those people have asked those questions, if you could provide your question to us again with your email address, because they've all come in as anonymous ones, we'll seek to connect you up to one of the panelists and see if we can answer that question for you. So I want to thank each of our panelists today. Thank you to Perry Cross, to Rebecca Thomas, and to Alicia Rathbone as well. Also want to say thank you to our Auslan interpreter, Therese Lewis, as well. Thank you all for joining us today. This is a monthly webinar that we do on a range of topics around disability, innovation and inclusion. And we hope you can join us for next month's topic as well. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can see this and many other conversations that have happened in the past. And also, if you can stay on the call afterwards and just provide a little bit of feedback on this webinar, we're always trying to improve what we're doing as well. Really appreciate everyone for joining us today. Thank you for such a great discussion topic, and there's been so many fantastic questions come through. On behalf of the team at Remarkable, we exist really to try and see greater use of technology and innovation to see greater inclusion. And so on behalf of the Remarkable team and all of us at CPA, at Cerebral Palsy Alliance, we thank you for joining us today. And we hope to see you next time. Thanks again. Bye-bye.